Hi, I'm OliverH24. In this video, I'm going to be creating a fading system for Unity where you can fade from one scene into the next scene. If you've ever loaded between scenes in Unity, you'll know that the game will freeze momentarily between loading. Even the tiniest scenes will still take a moment to load. Now, even though there's nothing we can do about the actual freeze itself, you can only perceive it if there's things moving around on the screen. Fading out and then fading back in again is a really easy way to disguise it, because once you've fully faded out and the screen is fully black, the player won't notice if the game momentarily pauses, because the screen will still look the same. So let's hop into Unity and I'll show you how to do this in your own games. Okay, so I have on my screen Unity 6 and I've created a new URP 3D project. This will work with 2D, 3D, and it'll work with whatever version of Unity you're using. But if you're using Unity 6, it'll look the same as mine does. So it says here that I've got README assets. I'm just going to delete those because who needs to read me? Not me. Okay, so we are in our sample scene now. I'm just going to delete that as well, and we're going to start from scratch. So delete that. We're just going to create a new scene. I'm going to call that scene 1. And then we're going to go into that one. And we're not going to save the changes to sample scene because we just deleted that. Okay, so this is scene 1. So in scene 1, I am going to add a sphere so that we can tell that this is the sphere scene. And then I'm just going to zoom in on that sphere. I'm going to go to like -3, that'll do. And 0, so that's in the middle of the screen. So this is our sphere scene. I'll just save that, Control and S, and then I'll Control C, Control V on my scene to make another one, and I'll just call that scene 2. So in scene 2, I'm going to delete the sphere, and I'm going to make a cube. So we have a scene with a sphere in it and a scene with a cube in it, and now we can tell once we've moved from one scene to the other. I'm going to go back into scene 1 and make a new folder in the project called prefabs. And then in this scene, I'm going to add a new game object called Fade Manager. And then I'm going to make this into a prefab. And then I'll put it into my prefab folder. There we go. And then I'm actually going to hop into scene 2. Go to my prefabs and drag this into here as well. So now it's in both scenes, which is what we want. If we go back to scene 1, we'll go to our Fade Manager. On here, I'm going to add a canvas. You can actually make a canvas a child of a normal game object, which is what we're going to do. So the settings we're going to want a screen space overlay, so it's laid on top of our screen. I'm going to put the sort order at 1000, just so it appears on top of everything else, which is what you want for a screen fade. And I'm going to change the size to scale with screen size, and I'm going to do 1920 by 1080. And then I'm going to add an image to this canvas. I'm going to leave this with no sprite, so it's just a solid colour. This can be whatever colour you want actually, so I'm going to do it black for now because traditionally you fade to black and then fade in from black, but you could have this whatever colour you want. And the way we're going to make it work with any colour is by adding a canvas group. So if I turn this alpha down now, you can see that it fades in and out. And if I change this to like a red, I can still fade in and out. And all we have to control is the alpha on the canvas group. So I'll just put that back to black for now. Okay, so if we go to our Fade Manager, override and apply all, that will now be the same in both scenes, which is what we want. So we actually want to make this image full screen. We can do that by going to Stretch and then setting all these at 0. So now that that's full screen, if we just fade out, we can see it fades in, fades out. All we have to control is this alpha, and that will do the fade for us. As you can see as well, if I change the colour to something else, we can just fade in and out to whatever colour we want. So I'm just going to do black, and I'll set the alpha to 0 so we can see the scene as well. And that is all the setup really we need to do in Unity. We can now jump into coding. So we're going to add a new script and we're going to call this Fade Manager. So So I've just loaded into that script. I'm going to make it full screen so you can see, and then I'm going to zoom in so you can read it. Okay, so I'm going to delete all this code here. Now, the things we're going to need are a reference to our image and our canvas group. So if we do serialized field image, and we do the Unity UI one, so it adds in using unityengine.ui. You can add that manually if it didn't add that. Visual Studio's got really good now at suggesting things. It's quite good at knowing what you want to do. So I'm going to call this fade image. I do an underscore because it's a private variable. I've not written private, we could just add that in there. It's probably better to add it in so it's clear. And the reason for serialized field is so that it shows up in the inspector and we can click and drag our image into this field. So we do the same again, serialized field so it shows up in inspector, private because we don't want to access it from another script. And I can do canvas group here and we'll just call that canvas group. Cool. So now we have both of those. That's all we need really to fade in and out. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is using an eye enumerator, and that's also sometimes called a coroutine. It's really hard to explain what a coroutine is and why you would use it until you've used it and you can see what it does. But basically, it's an easy way of running code that happens over time. And you just sort of set it up, set it running, and then you can kind of forget about it. It's also effective because it lets you do things like wait for a certain amount of time before running the next line. Hopefully by following this tutorial and video, you'll see why coroutines are sometimes really useful. And even though they're a little bit confusing at first, they actually make things easier in the long run. So to add a coroutine, we basically do eye enumerator, which is another word for coroutine, really. And we just want to make that private as well because we'll be running it from this script. And I'm going to call that animate fade. And this is going to be a coroutine that when run will take care of our fade for us. So all we need to worry about is setting it off and then it'll run in the background of our game and it'll just do the fade for us. So what do we need in order to fade? Well, we need a float, we need a start alpha, a float end alpha, and those will be the setting that we use on the canvas group for how much alpha to use. 0 alpha means that the image is completely transparent and you can't see it. 1 alpha means it's fully opaque and there's no transparency at all. We'll also need a float duration to know how long the fade should last. Actually, we could also add a float called delay before fade, and then we can get it to wait for a certain amount of time before it does the fade. So before we fade, we're going to want to do fade image dot enabled equals true, and then we want to do canvas group dot alpha equals start alpha, and that will set the current alpha of the group to our start value. And then at the end we're going to do canvas group dot alpha equals end alpha, and then between the start alpha and the end alpha we want to slowly over time fade from one to the other for the duration. So what we also want to do here is yield return null, and that will wait 1 frame before it starts to animate. So if we're fading into the scene, it'll set the screen to completely black, and then it'll wait a frame, and then it will start to fade in. So after we've waited 1 frame, we want to do yield return new wait 4 seconds. So we're going to wait for an amount of time, and we're going to wait for our delay before fade. So now we're going to want to animate between our start value and our end value. And to do that, we need to know how long has passed since we started animating. So to do that, we want to do float time elapsed and keep track of how long has passed since we started animating. So I'll set that to 0. And then it's already suggesting here, and this is what we want to do. We want to do while the time elapsed is less than our duration, we want to animate the fade. And how do we animate the fade? Well, we need to know the float progress of the fade. So in fact, we'll call that fade percentage. Fade percentage, and that'll tell us where we are within the fade. And how do we calculate that? We can do time elapsed divided by the duration. And that will tell us what percentage of the way through the fade animation that we are. We should also, just to be safe, do a fade percentage equals, and it's already suggested it, that's what we want to do. We want to do a mathf.clamp01 fade percentage. And that will mean that our percentage is basically clamped between 0 and 1. So if it went to 1.2, it'd be cut off at 1. Or if it went below 0, it'd be cut off at 0. And that's what we want, because we don't want to fade further than transparent, and we don't want to fade further than fully opaque. So clamping it gives us a percentage of 0 being 0% and 1 being 100%. We don't necessarily know whether we're going from 0 to 1 alpha, or 1 to 0, or even 0.5 alpha to 0, or 0 to 0.5. So the way that we can account for all of those different possibilities is we can do canvas group dot alpha equals mathf.lerp. So this is a little bit confusing as well, but it basically, if you give it two values, A and B, you can then choose how much to move from the value A to the value B using T, which is a percentage. So if value A was 1 and value B was 2, and we did T is 0.5, it will do 0.5 of the way between A and B. So halfway between 1 and 2, which would be 1.5. So we can do our start alpha is our first value, our end alpha is the end, and then we need to use our fade percentage to know how far through the fade we should do. And that will set our alpha to the correct percentage. But what we also need to do then is add in time elapsed plus equals time.delta time. We need to know how long has gone past since the last frame to know what percentage of the way we should be through the fade. And then once the time elapsed has gone past the length of the duration, it will end this while loop. So the other thing we need in the while loop is a yield return null. And that will just wait until the next frame before it continues to do this loop. One other thing I'm going to do, just to kind of optimize this as best we can, is if end alpha is less than or equal to 0, then we want to disable our fade image. So we can do fade image dot enabled equals false, and that will just turn the image off if it's completely transparent, which will just save on rendering, because I think even though it's fully transparent, it will still be rendered and it will use up processing power to do that. So it's just good practice to disable that object when we're not using it, and then it gets re-enabled once we start our next fade. The next thing we're going to add is a serialized field, so it appears in Inspector, private, because we're not going to access it from other scripts, bool, and we're going to call this automatically fade in on scene load. And this will mean we can just throw this in the scene and we don't have to worry about triggering a fade in if we don't want to. So to do that, we need an awake function, and in awake we're basically going to call a new function that will trigger our coroutine. So this is going to be called do fade. And to do a fade, we need to know our float, start alpha, float, end alpha, float, duration, and float, delay before fade. Basically all the same things that we need to know to start our coroutine. And it's got a squiggly line because I didn't do void. I just need to add void on there. So then in this function, we're going to do start coroutine, and we're going to start our fade animate, our animate fade it's called. And then we're going to pass in our start alpha, our end alpha, our duration, and our delay before fade. And that will just start the coroutine. The other thing we want to do is keep a record of this coroutine, and we can do that by writing private coroutine. We'll just call it fade coroutine there. And then we want to do fade coroutine equals start coroutine animate fade. And then that means we can get access to that coroutine later. Then what we want to do in here is if fade coroutine doesn't equal null, that means there's a coroutine already running. We want to do stop coroutine, and we'll give it our fade coroutine. And that basically just means if it is already running the coroutine, we're just going to stop it from running, and then we're going to start a new coroutine. And that just will fix things. If we're already fading and then we trigger another fade, we don't want both fades to run at the same time. We want it to stop the first fade and do the second fade. And then in our awake function, we can just do fade. We can either type these values in directly here, or we can add them as variables that we can edit from inspector. So let's do it that way. We'll edit them from the inspector. We'll do serialized private float, and we'll call it start alpha, and then we'll do serialize field private float end alpha, and then we'll do fade duration, and we will do serialize field private float delay before fade. And these are actually, I'm going to rename them because these are actually only for the automatic fade in. So I'll put automatic fade start alpha, automatic fade end alpha. And I can just copy and paste this automatic fade bit we've done here and put that there and call it automatic fade duration. And this one, automatic fade, delay before fade. It's weird to have fade, so I'll just call that automatic fade. I think it's implied that it is the duration of the fade anyway. So in awake, we will do a fade and we'll use our automatic fade start alpha for the start alpha. For the end alpha, we'll use our automatic end alpha. For duration, we'll use our automatic fade duration. And then we'll use our automatic fade delay before fade. But we only want to do that if automatically fade in our scene load is true. And in that case, yes, we will do a fade. And if not, we don't need to worry about that. So actually this do fade, I'm going to make this public so that we can trigger it from other scripts. And I'll show you how to do that as well so you can add it into your game. Cool, I think this looks good. So let's try testing it now in Unity. So if we hop back into our Unity editor, then we need to assign some of these variables. So our fade image is just on this image object. Our canvas group is also on our fade image object. And I'm going to enable automatically fade in on scene load so we can test it. For start value of alpha, I'm going to do 1. End value, I'm going to do 0. For the fade duration, I'm going to do 2, just so we can really clearly see that it's taking 2 seconds to fade in. And automatic fade delay before fade, let's do 2 as well, just so we can really see that this is working. And then if I press play, it should wait 2 seconds, and then it should fade in from black and take 2 seconds to do it. So that works. Perfect. We just need to apply all these overrides that we've made. Now if I hop back into scene 2, save that, it will have all of the changes that we've just made. So that already has our start alpha, end alpha, duration, and our delay before fade. Perfect. So let's go back into scene 1. I'm now going to write some code that will allow us to jump from one scene to the other. So to do that, I'm just going to do build profiles. I'm going to add both of these scenes into our scene list here. So scene 1, scene 2. And then I'm going to remove our sample scene because we got rid of that one. So both of those are in there. And then I'm going to make a new script in here. I'll put it on our fade manager for now, just so it's in both scenes, but you don't have to do that. This is just a test script. I'll just call this fade manager tester. Okay, so in this script, we are going to test our other script. So to test it, we basically want to do, in the update method, we want to do if input.get key down, and then we'll just use key code, the letter P. So we're doing input get key down, key code P. So that means the player has pressed the letter P on their keyboard. And if they've done that, we will need a reference to our fade manager. So we can just do serialized field, private, fade manager, and we'll call that fade manager. There. We will trigger on our fade manager a do fade. And then to test it, let's just put the values of start alpha will be 0, end alpha will be 1, our duration will be 1, and our delay before fade we'll put 0, so it does it instantly. And then we'll do an if input.get key down, we'll do the next key along, so keycode.o. Then we want to do a fade manager dot do fade 1 0, so it does the opposite fade, 1 for duration and 0 for delay. So this one will fade us from transparent to opaque, and this one will fade us from opaque to transparent. So that's fade out, and that is fade in. And then we'll also do an if input.get key down, key code dot I, we will scene manager dot load scene, and we will load scene 2. And then we'll do if input dot get key down, key code dot u, scene manager dot load scene 1, and then we can travel between our two scenes quite easily by pressing I and U on the keyboard. Cool, that should allow us to test jumping between scenes and triggering a fade in and a fade out, and we're automatically fading in when the scene loads. The only other thing that would be good for me to show you is how to load the new scene but fade out first. So I'll do another if input.get key down, and we'll do the next one along, which is y, get key code dot y. For this we need to do an I enumerator, and we'll call this fade out and then load scene, and we'll take a string value which will be the scene name, and then we're going to do, we will want to load the scene, but before we load the scene we'll want to do yield return new wait for seconds, and then I'll put 1 second. Before we wait for 1 second we want to trigger the fade, so I can just do fade manager dot do fade. So we're fading out, so we want to go from transparent to opaque for 1 second and 0 delay. Cool. And then in our Y code we can just put start coroutine, And then the coroutine to start is fade out and then load scene. And we need to give it the string of the scene to load. So we'll just do this one for scene 2, just so I can show you. We might as well do another one here with the same thing, but we'll load scene 1. And this will be T. So this now will allow us to test and make sure everything's working. And these are the code lines that you would use in your existing code in order to trigger a fade and also to fade out and then load a different level in your game. So save that. So if we press play now, it'll wait and then it'll fade in. And then we can press our different buttons to try the different fades. So press P, nothing has happened because we haven't assigned our fade manager here. So we just want to assign our fade manager, and then we want to click apply all so that this affects both of our scenes and they've both got our new script on it. So we press play and we can test this scene out. So it fades in automatically as we set. I'm going to press P, it fades out. I'm going to press O, it fades in. I'm going to press P and then press O, and it still works because it cancels the first coroutine and starts the next one. So fade out, fade in. I'm going to press I, so it should just load instantly into the next level and then fade in. So it loads and then fades in slowly. And the same for loading into the other scene instantly and then fades in. But what we want to test now is our fade out and then fade into the other scene. So if I press Y, it'll fade out, it'll automatically load the next scene, and then it'll fade in to our square cube scene. If I press T, it'll fade out of the cube scene and fade into the sphere scene. So everything is working as it should do. I'll just show you as well, if we go to our fade manager and we decide actually we don't want it to fade to black, we want to fade to a nice blue colour, we can just put that in there, and then we will apply it so that it affects the other scene as well. Apply, play. Now instantly this will already work with blue, so I'll wait and it'll fade in from blue. We can press our P key to fade back to blue, O to fade back in. We can press T to load our other scene automatically after fading out. And there you have it. That's how you can fade in and out of your scenes in your game in Unity. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe for more videos. Let me know in the comments if you've got any issues or questions or ideas for future videos you'd like to see. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.